Let me have the next slide, please. And here they say, as chief executive of Bethlehem Steel in 2002, Mr. Miller shut down the pension plan, leaving a federal program to meet the company's $3.7 billion in unfunded obligations. Now, let me just add that the federal program only pays a fraction of what's due these steel workers. That turned the Moribund Company into a prime acquisition target. Wilbur Ross, a so-called vulture capitalist, snapped it up, combined it with 4 other dying steel makers he bought about the same time, and sold the resulting company for $4.5 billion, a return of more than 1,000% in just 3 years on $400 million that he paid for all 5 companies. Come back to me, please. So here we have a situation where a finance guy put up roughly $400 million, and in 3 years he turned that into $4.5 billion, in effect, by cheating the, not him, it's really, when I say by cheating, it's not that Wilbur Ross did the cheating. The system is set up to cheat the workers. So $4 billion that should have gone to Bethlehem Steel workers, that should have gone to pay for their benefits, that should have gone to their pensions, that went to these financial sector guys. Let's have the next slide, please. 2 years later, as chief executive of Federal Mogul, an auto parts maker in Southfield, Michigan, Mr. Miller worked winding up a pension plan, another euphemism, for some 37,000 employees in England. The British authorities balked at the idea, feeling that such a move would swamp the pension insurance fund that Britain was creating. It began operations only last April. But investor Carl C. Icahn, and again, I have nothing against Mr. Icahn, has placed a big bet that the Federal Mogul will pay off after the pension plan is gone. He has bought its bonds at less than 20 cents in the dollar and is offering money to help the insurance fund. He, too, stands to make millions. Come back to me, please. So here's another example of a financial guy who's going to reap incredible rewards, and who's taking the hit? Ordinary working people. Let's have the next slide, please. And now Mr. Miller is at Delphi. This is another auto parts maker that was spun off by General Motors. And they say if passed as prologue, one of the most powerful turnaround tools at his disposal would be his ability to ditch Delphi's pension plan. Ditch Delphi's pension plan. He did not return numerous phone calls seeking his views on this article, but in the past he said that his first priority at Delphi was to, and I quote, resolve, unquote, quote, uncompetitive labor cost structure. That includes roughly $5 billion gap between the pensions it's promised and the amount that is put aside to pay for it. Come back to me, please. So here we have the Delphi company, at one time a subsidiary of General Motors, spun off, and here they did not contribute $5.1 billion that Delphi employees should have gotten, and now we have this turnaround specialist, another financial guy. Actually, it's the same Miller guy from Bethlehem. And again, they're going to resolve the issue, get rid of this uncompetitive labor structure, again, screwing the workers. Let's have the next slide, please. I have 3 more of these. And here we say if the obligation to make good on Delphi's pensions eventually lands in whole or part at the door of the government guarantor, few should be surprised. The Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation has become an increasingly popular option for private capital funds and other investors who are seeking to spin investments in near-bankrupt industrial companies into gold. The key is to shift responsibility for the pensions, which weigh as heavily as bank loans, on a company's balance sheet to the pension corporation. Please come back to me. So in other words, what all along, again, because the monetary structure broke the tie to gold, resulted in volatility in interest rates, they got to smooth what they said was the expected return on pension plan assets, didn't contribute enough to the pension plans, and now what's happening is they want to pawn these stuff off on these promises that they've made to workers. And by the way, these workers who work for steel companies for 30 years, this is a dangerous, back-breaking, hard job. In effect, they're screwing these people out of their pensions. Let's come back to the next slide, please. And now they say the same financial alchemy has been performed at Polaroid and U.S. Airways, at textile companies like Cone Mills and West Point Stevens, and a host of smaller companies over the last 4 years. And bankruptcy specialists say that's almost certain to keep happening because, again, shedding pensions and pensioners' health care obligations is turning into an irresistible way to make high investment pay off. Let me have the next slide, please. This is really telling to me. It says, like defaulting on a loan, Terminating the pension plan significantly lightens the company's balance sheet, and this is the important phrase, folks. The business instantly becomes more valuable because it does not have to use cash flow to pay for past mistakes. Does not have to use cash flow to pay for past mistakes. Come back to me, please. So now you see that they're positioning the promises that they've made to workers. This is a past mistake. And if somehow we can get rid of this mistake, which really is a euphemism for screwing the workers out of their pensions and benefits, then these financial guys can make a fortune. Let's come back to me. This is the last of these quotes I want to give you. And this one is really telling, folks. So here we have, do you have that next slide? So GM has promised to assume all medical costs for retirees if Delphi faltered. Again, Delphi was a subsidiary of General Motors that they spun off, an obligation estimated at $9.6 billion. Now here's the key phrase here. Securities analysts have been parsing the language of the promise to pay pensions, trying to determine if GM must really shoulder this entire amount, and to the extent to which Delphi would have to pay GM if it rebounded. GM has its own heavy obligations. You can come back to me. Now what they're saying here in this business of parsing the language, really what they're doing now is they get the attorneys involved, and they're going through these promises that they've made to workers. They're going through the fine print to see if there's some way they can get out of keeping their promises to the workers. This is just disgusting. I mean, where are our elected representatives in letting this kind of malfeasance go on? Where are the union people, the union leadership who negotiated these contracts with the car companies? Well, in all due respect, they're in a tough place now, because on account of this malfeasance in the monetary structure and a whole bunch of other machinations that I've spoken about in other programs, in effect, in my view, GM and Ford and Chrysler, they have been in slow motion liquidation for years. And in effect, the unions are hanging on by their fingernails. What's union management supposed to do now? I mean, they're between a rock and a hard place. If they insist that the workers get their due, they could drive these companies into bankruptcy and all could be lost. So really what's happened here, folks, is that over a long period, again, only because of malfeasance in the monetary structure, millions of our fellow citizens are being cheated, have been cheated, and will be cheated out of their pensions and benefits that they've been promised. Let me have the next slide, please. This is a plot that came from the New York Times, and it shows the percentage of the pension that is funded for New York City. Now, I don't know if you can see on the left-hand side, it shows that New York City considers their pension 100% funded. However, the actuaries show that it's only 60% funded, and in the slide to the plot to the right, it shows that the shortfall is something like $50 billion, $49 billion. So in New York City, they're screwing around too. And they're screwing around, by the way, in a lot of cities. Let's have the next slide, please. Now, this is an interesting thing, which also relates to workers' savings and the well-being of ordinary people's balance sheet. It shows the number of bankruptcy filings in thousands from 1940 to 2001. And as you can see, in 1940 and 1960, a very tiny amount, maybe 10,000, 20,000 people went bankrupt. Well, you know what? In 2001, which is the last year for which I have data, something like 1.5 million of our fellow citizens went bankrupt. How do you account for this huge upswing in bankruptcies among ordinary people? Let me go to the next slide, please. This data comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it shows the payroll employment in manufacturing, and that big gray area under the line, that's the loss of manufacturing jobs in thousands.